Well, welcome, Bulldog fans. As you know, David Murray and I typically shoot a Maroon Friday video. This is not David Murray. David Murray is actually in Manhattan, Kansas, already on site. He'll be providing full coverage for us of the Bulldogs' upcoming game with Kansas State. We have an honored guest today, my friend, colleague, 30-year veteran of the Mississippi State faculty, I guess, or administration. Mr. Mike Nemeth. Mike, welcome to the show.
Oh, glad to be here. Glad to join you.
Well, Mike, a lot's been made of this week of this matchup, and many of the prognosticators very early in the preseason were kind of favoring Kansas State and saying this is going to be a real tall task for the Bulldogs. We expect a challenge, but the narrative is kind of flipped. What do you make of that?
Well, the first weekend, I think, actually flipped the narrative. And there's, it's difficult to read too much into one weekend's play. And if you do, you're probably mistaken in going strictly on the outcomes from the first week. I think, from a football standpoint, I think there's some things in college football that are traditions that you can bank on, and one of them is that, Kansas State is going to be good. They're going to play well. They're going to play well early in the season, and they're going to play well on defense, and I think we'll see that this weekend.
You mentioned them playing well. Bill Snyder's team, very uncharacteristic last week. 13 penalties, committed some turnovers, including a pick six that really looked like it was going to cement the game for South Dakota, but they scored 15 points in the final quarter, including a special teams touchdown, which Kansas State's known for special teams being very strong. Bulldogs are going to have to be good in all phases of the ball game to win on Saturday.
Well, there's no doubt. And, in special teams particularly, because that's where Kansas State has made their name over the years, is being able to take those punt returns, kick returns, or coverages and turning them into positives for their team. And so, yeah, that will be definitely something that Mississippi State will have to, watch this weekend.
One of the headlines, too, Nick Fitzgerald now prepared to make his 2018 season debut, set out last week. A one-game suspension for an unspecified rules violation. We're not going to speculate into that because, quite frankly, it's not our business. But more importantly, Nick is back now, and it's been a good fall camp for him. He's battled back from a very gruesome injury, Mike. Do you expect any rust from number 7?
I do. I think that you can't help but think that there could be some rust to knock off this week. He hasn't played competitively since that Egg Bowl, hasn't been hit since the Egg Bowl. I think that, in Kansas State is going to throw some things at him, I'm sure, to try to get him uncomfortable. And, they play well at home. It's a good home crowd. And I think that initially they're going to be very competitive. It's going to be how well Mississippi State withstands that early onslaught that determines what the outcome of the game is.
I think it's pretty fair that Kansas State will throw probably some things they didn't show on film at Nick Fitzgerald just to see how mobile he is. And see, here's the thing, Mike, as physically prepared as he may be, there's the mental part of that too. I don't care how tough you are and how strong you are. When you had an injury like he's had, it's going to be one of those deals where you have to really second-guess yourself, and that's where I think Nick Fitzgerald's got to prove that he's back, is that he's still willing to go make those swashbuckling-type plays and kind of deal with the physicality and be the same runner he always has been.
Well, and this isn't Stephen F. Austin. This is a program that's historically been very good, been to bowl games, 8 straight years, won 8 ball games last year and won their bowl game, have most of the people back from that team. Offensive line should be a veteran, experienced group. They've got 2 quarterbacks who played last year. Running back who's they think is going to be a 1,000-yard rusher and a decent receiver. So, they've got some parts, that could make it very difficult on Mississippi State. At the same time, I think Mississippi State is much deeper, particularly at both lines of scrimmage. I think they're, stronger, faster at this point than what Kansas State is.
Now, looking when Kansas State heads to football, they run a lot of the same offensive concepts that Dan Mullen did here at Mississippi State for many years. A lot of quarterback design runs, a lot of zone reads and things like that. What kind of advantage, if any, can you draw from that for Mississippi State?
Well, I don't know. Obviously, they didn't see a whole lot of that last weekend. What they saw last weekend was 2 and 3, step drops and get rid of the ball in a hurry. Kansas State will give them a little bit more to work to handle from an offensive standpoint, and they are definitely a run-oriented team. They're going to want to run the tailback with some power. They're going to run the quarterback as often as he can, and obviously both of them because they're both good runners.
Mike, our people on the Mississippi Gulf Coast had to deal with the tropical occurrence earlier this week, but nothing like we've seen at Kansas State. They've had some historic flooding up there. Campus has not been really been affected. The game should be okay. But it's one of those things, too, when you think about the turf up there, they've got that next generation turf, so the playing surface should be good. Do you expect the weather to have any bearing on the game whatsoever?
I really don't. I don't think that's an area that Mississippi State's going to have to be concerned with because, again, I think Kansas State is going to line up and do what they do best, and that's going to be to run the football. They're not going to get into a throwing game. They don't want to get behind 2 scores where they've got to come from behind, and certainly not against Mississippi State. And I think that Mississippi State will try to run the football as well. And so whatever the conditions are, I think the teams are going to stay with what they do best.
Along those lines, too, Mississippi State had Monday off. That is now the traditional day off here at Mississippi State. Tuesday, they practice inside the comfort of the Palmetto Center. On Wednesday, your Bulldogs practiced in the rain, despite maybe the chagrin of a few. But they did practice in the rain, so should there be any ball handling issues, they've had a chance to kind of work through some of that this week. One of the things that I think about, Mike, is how much will we see Nick Fitzgerald run this weekend? Kansas State very, very strong against the run last year. As you mentioned, a lot of those players back, and that's really kind of what makes them a little different than the rest of the Big 12. They're pretty strong against the run and really play a pretty good brand of defense. Even though last year it wasn't an exceptionally strong and well-rounded defense, they were very susceptible to the pass, but very strong against the run. So how much do you run Nick Fitzgerald in his first game back against the front that's pretty salty?
Well, I don't think it's a design situation. I don't think you want Nick running the ball a bunch. But I think if you take that away from him, you're taking away one of his big weapons. And really one of the big weapons of the offense is the ability to run with the quarterback, the running backs, and also to be able to get the ball to the outside to the wide receivers and tight ends. And I think if you try to take that away, you lose some of his effectiveness. Now, I don't think they're going to ask him to run the ball 25 times as he did it on occasion last year. I just don't think that's part of the plan. But I think they're going to do whatever they have to do to win.
Mississippi State currently a 9.5-point favorite in the ball game. I don't think people expected the odds to be in that favor back in the preseason. But as Mike said earlier, after the results of Week 1, I think people see Mississippi State and Kansas State in a much different light. Bulldogs, obviously, have already left and traveled. They're going to have that 11 a.m. kick Central Time tomorrow. It's ESPN, so if you're a DirecTV subscriber, that's Channel 206. It will be an ESPN national broadcast rather than just a network broadcast. A big day of college football. Not a lot of big games in the conference. I think you could argue Georgia, South Carolina, Clemson, A&M, probably the marquee matchups. This might be number 3 when we get down to it.
Well, anytime I think you have a Power 5 game versus an SEC opponent, that's going to be a big game. And Kansas State is a Power 5 opponent, Big 12 conference, middle of the pack usually in the Big 12 or top of the top half of the pack. So I mean, definitely. I think it's a very good football game from a competitive standpoint.
Finally, I think Mississippi State wins the football game. I think unless Mississippi State helps Kansas State by giving them a short field or allowing a big special team return at State, should be able to prevent them from driving the field much of the day. And I do expect State to win. Could be a tussle for a half, but if Fitzgerald gets off to a quick start, I think it could be a ball game that gets away from Kansas State.
Well, I agree. I think Mississippi State wins the game. I think it might be a little tighter than what a lot of people think. The 9.5 points is probably about right. And but I think it'll be fairly low scoring because I think, again, both schools know what the other team's going to do, and I think that both have the ability to stop it. I have a hard time seeing Kansas State line up and just run the football on Mississippi State. I think Mississippi State is too good in their front seven, and I'm not sure that Kansas State is capable of getting by on the throwing game. So they're going to be challenged offensively, and just depending upon how quickly Nick Fitzgerald adapts to his surroundings will determine how good Mississippi State is on offense.
Well, there you have it, folks. It's going to do it for our video presentation here from the Junction. This place was just brimming with activity last Friday. We'll be again next Friday. But we thank Mike Nemeth for joining us today. Hope you enjoyed our presentation. We look forward to providing you the latest and greatest and most tremendous information about Mississippi State the rest of this year. You can subscribe to all of our content at Gene's Page 247. Be the best friend your friends have and tell them to come join you at Gene's Page 247.